And that's what happens gradually. You just stop having sex and then you stop cuddling and kissing, and the relationship really, really changes when you lose the physical intimacy and the physical connection. I started dating and really not having sex, maybe every once in a while. It was still pretty uncomfortable. And I happened to meet this guy, and this is just my own weird story, who had taken a Tantra workshop. And he introduced me to this whole concept, this whole different way to approach sexuality. And that's what I think about when I think about Tantra. A lot of people think about it as orgies and all of that. And it's actually a beautiful, very ancient spiritual practice. But from a practical perspective, it's a completely different approach to sexuality. And that approach, which is so much less goal-oriented and performance-based and much more focused on really connecting with sensations in your body, just allowed me to experience sex from a completely different perspective. And that was very healing for me.
Welcome to yourbrilliance.com. I'm your host, Amy Waterman. And today you're going to find out why, when it comes to sex, your best years are yet to come. Now that might sound kind of crazy for some of you. I mean, after all, don't most folks peak sexually like in their 20s, with those raging hormones and no responsibilities, and certainly not any children? Well, there isn't as much time and energy for sex as we get older, but age has its advantages. You know your body better, you're more relaxed, and hopefully you have a partner with a little more experience than those early boyfriends. Our guest for today, Xanet Pailet, sees even more advantages to age. She had her own sexual awakening at 50, and now she teaches other women the power of pleasure. Xanet is a sex and intimacy coach, a Tantra teacher, a sexological body worker, a holistic pelvic care practitioner, and now an author. Her first book, Living an Orgasmic Life, came out this summer and quickly became an Amazon #1 bestseller. Welcome, Xanet.
Thank you, Amy. I am so delighted to be here.
So I want to start out with your life story. So take us back to your mid-40s, and you were living in New York City. You had a successful career. You had a fabulous family, but all was not well.
Yeah, that's like exactly the truth. It seemed on the surface like everything was perfect. But in fact, I was completely shut down and shut off from my sexuality. And we were living in a sexless marriage. My ex-husband and I were actually sleeping in separate beds. We did that for like 15 years. I'm almost embarrassed to still say that, but it's true. And it was really, for me, it was actually a relief because I had had problems with sex my entire life. Sex was painful. I had, medical issues every time I had sex. So not having sex after my second kid was born, I was like, great, done. But then I didn't realize we were going to lose intimacy. We were going to lose connection. The relationship just suffered immensely because of the decision. And it wasn't like, honestly, it wasn't like, oh, I'm not going to have sex. It just happened gradually. And that's what happens gradually. You just stop having sex and then you stop cuddling and kissing. And the relationship really, really changes when you lose the physical intimacy and the physical connection.
Well, the problem too is it's pretty hard to talk about. I mean, because you're ashamed of what's going on, and men never seem to want to get any help, and it does seem easier to just shove it under the carpet rather than deal with it. How did you get up the courage to actually say, wait a second, I think we need to do something?
Well, that's the problem. I never did. I mean, I was so shut down on around my own sexuality. I had so much shame. When your body isn't working, Amy, you just feel broken. I felt like broken, like I was a worn out tire that could not be repaired, right? That's actually what I believed for most of my marriage. And, if I brought it up, if we tried to have a conversation, if we tried after like a year to try to have sex, like it always ended up in tears and fights. And so you get to a point where you're just like, forget it. I just don't want to deal with it. I wouldn't say it was like the only thing that broke up the marriage, but it was one of the major factors that broke up the marriage. And so we never talked about it. We still don't talk about it. It just never got talked about.
Yeah. So this is amazing because, of course, looking at what you do now, obviously this is not an issue for you anymore. And you said you had your sexual awakening at 50.
It's
And
true.
not within a marriage either, outside the marriage. Is this like, do we just wake up at 50? Is it just an age thing, or did you do something?
Well, it's actually interesting. It's kind of a combination. I mean, for me personally, I did something, right? I decided to leave the marriage, and I also started to have this like sense, like, I'm miserable in this marriage. I want to be in a relationship, but I've got this sex thing and I've got to deal with it. I'm too young not just to close myself down. And I knew I wanted to be in another relationship or relationships. So I actually, but it was like I kind of went to a pelvic floor therapist who wasn't really that helpful because they give you these like hard dilators to try to open up the vagina, and it's very painful. So that wasn't exactly a lot of fun. And, I started dating and really not having sex, maybe every once in a while. It was still pretty uncomfortable. And I happened to meet this guy, and this is just my own weird story, who had taken a Tantra workshop. And he introduced me to this whole concept, this whole different way to approach sexuality. And that's what I think about when I think about Tantra. A lot of people think about it as orgies and all of that. And it's actually a beautiful, very ancient spiritual practice. But from a practical perspective, it's a completely different approach to sexuality. And that approach, which is so much less goal-oriented and performance-based and much more focused on really connecting with sensations in your body, just allowed me to experience sex from a completely different perspective. And that was very healing for me.
Yeah, it's almost like the difference between masculine sex and feminine sex, because the masculine sex is really the goal is orgasm, and then you get there and you're done. But with Tantra, what I love about, because I've read your book, and what I love about how you describe it, it's about being in the moment and enjoying right now, not trying to get somewhere, but just right now.
Totally. And that changes it, right? If you have a lot of anxiety, as I did, about pain, about orgasm, because I couldn't have orgasms either, of course, because how can you have orgasms if you're not aroused? Then just being in the moment and just being okay with like whatever I'm feeling, like, oh, thank God, I'm just feeling something and I can enjoy being there. That just allows the whole body to relax. And it's that relaxation that allows arousal to actually happen for women. It's very different. Like we actually need to be relaxed in order to get aroused and to have an orgasm.
And I don't think I can be emphasized enough, because what I see, especially in marriages where both people are working and there's kids that have to be put to bed and there's things to do the next day, sex is something you kind of have on your to-do list. Oh, right, we're going to bed. Okay, quick sex. Okay, now thank God I can get to sleep. And so many women are sleep deprived. One of my favorite podcasts asked guests, if you had to choose between one or the other, sex or sleep, which would you choose? And so many people, over half of them, choose sleep because we're tired and, sex takes up time. And this is where I love your approach, because it says, wait a second, that's probably why we're having the problems. Right there is how we're thinking of it.
Right, exactly. And, I think also like most women haven't really had very good sex. That's the reality.
Yeah.
Right? Most women haven't. I mean, it's really sad to say, but I think part of the reason women don't want to have sex is because they really haven't had great sex. It may be obligation sex. It may be about pleasing their partner, them feeling pressure to have this orgasm, to get it over with. Like, who wants to put yourself through that if you're not actually enjoying it? And I think that's a big part for women. They're not aroused enough. And so if you're not aroused enough, it's just not going to feel that good. It's just going to be, okay, let me just get it over with.
Yeah, and that is so true. And the other thing, of course, is our bodies are changing too. With menopause, there's a lot of different changes. And even just getting older, you can't bend like a pretzel anymore. Things hurt. Like positions that probably worked for you before may end up suddenly becoming painful, but you feel that pressure to be that Victoria's Secret model in bed, and you're
Oh,
not anymore, and you don't want to let down your partner, like this is just a recipe for disaster.
it is. It's a recipe for shutdown, right? It's just like the body just says, I'm done, right? Which is why I think, you know, I believe that the reason that so many women, when they hit menopause, stop having sex. Yes, vaginal dryness comes into it, but that can, you know, that can be alleviated pretty well with some of the hormonal creams and even with doing like vaginal self-massage, right? I think they stop having sex because it's just not that good. And they're like, great, this is a perfect excuse. My husband will totally understand it. Oh, she's going through menopause. I can stop having sex. And then it's like, oh yeah, well, once my wife hit menopause, you know, things just changed and we stopped having sex. And I actually think like it's an unconscious kind of excuse for us just to be done with it. But in truth, right, I actually think what you said is so important, that women can peak. They can peak during menopause. They can peak in their 40s and their 50s for all of the reasons that you just stated. We can be in a really different place around our sexuality. We can be a lot more comfortable with it. We can be less concerned about pregnancy, right? We can, you know, for women who have had horrible PMS symptoms, for me, like, oh my God, menopause, even with the hot flashes and all of that, it was wonderful. It's like, oh, at least I'm not having cramps, you know, and horrible bleeding, right? So there's a lot of ways, I think, in which women going through menopause and post-menopause are actually becoming much more empowered around their sexuality. Also, we slow down, and that's the most important thing, right? When we can slow sex down, we can actually be in the moment and enjoy it. And I think that's another reason why women really start peaking. And I do think women peak in their 40s and 50s and 60s, despite the fact that the hormones actually flip at that point.
Okay, but I've got to ask the question. All this presumes that you have a partner who is on board. And I know, you know, with your marriage, there wasn't any ability to get your partner on board because you couldn't talk about it. And I think a lot of couples are in that boat. How do you work with your partner to get him interested in this non-goal oriented, in the moment, slow, sensual sex?
Not everybody's interested in it, but you know, what I find, because I've worked with men as well, is they actually really like slowing down too. Men have a lot of performance pressure, and as they age, they have more performance pressure, and not everybody wants to pop a blue pill, right? So, you know, I think, you know, men also crave intimacy. And, you know, men's skin is similar like women's skin. Like if we slow down and give them sensual touch, and, you know, we start to help to show that, like, wow, if we slow things down and we tease each other, we build up that desire, right? So a lot of it is education and conversations. Like the most important thing is you got to talk about it, you know, and if you can't talk about it, I often will tell couples, okay, you can't talk about sex. Why don't you just like each write down 5 things that you would like to do to each other or have that other person do to you, just to start a conversation around, these are things that I like, or these are things that I don't like. But it's really important to start that conversation. Men have more powerful experiences when they slow things down. Everybody does. It creates more
Wow.
intimacy, right? It creates more intimacy, and men crave intimacy. I mean, they go to sex for intimacy. Women need intimacy before we have sex, right? So there's that like crazy disconnect there. But men, just like everybody, craves intimacy, and they get that when they can slow things down and be really more present with themselves and with their partner.
And what I love too, like your website is called, you know, thepowerofpleasure.com. And what I really like is this idea that when it's not focused on orgasm and it's focused on pleasure, all the goalposts shifts. And especially for men, when men get off, we think they get off by reaching the end, but maybe they get off by seeing us experience pleasure. So maybe when we ask for what we want, and when we say, right, I want you to give me pleasure and I'm just going to receive, maybe that's what can change it, right? And then they get really happy because no longer is it about the end goal, and the pressure's off them and they get to please us.
That's absolutely true. That's 100% true. Most men are givers, especially as they get older, right? I mean, the 20-year-olds, maybe not so much. But most men are givers, and they really just want to please their partner, and they're frustrated when their partner isn't pleased, and they do get aroused from women's pleasure. That's absolutely true. That is correct. 100%. So you can use that argument.
So I want to talk to you quickly. You wrote a book, Living an Orgasmic Life. So are you saying that an orgasmic life is like, should we be having lots of more orgasms? What is this orgasmic life?
That's such a great question. So when I think about living an orgasmic life, I really think about being in the flow, because a good orgasm has a flow to it. It has ups and downs, but women's sexuality flows. And living an orgasmic life is allowing your life to flow, not to be blocked, to follow your intuition. And all of that happens when we tap into our sexuality. So my very strong belief is that, a woman's pelvic bowl is really the center of her creativity and her power. And when we can tap into that part of us, and it doesn't have to be with a partner. Like, I'm still single. I've had relationships, but I'm still single. But I'm constantly connecting with my sexuality. In fact, I think every woman should be connecting with their own sexuality in a self-loving practice. When we can connect to that part of us, we really are able to work with life force energy, because that's where life is created. And that's very, very powerful. And it does start transforming our entire life. I mean, and you can think about it from an orgasmic perspective. Like, if you do have an orgasm, right, you're in a different state of mind. You feel better, you feel healthier, you feel more attractive, you feel like the world is your oyster, that you can have what you want and you're not afraid to go out and ask for it. And when we're not connected to our sexuality, we tend to be, not only shut down sexually, but shut down emotionally, shut down in terms of our self-esteem. A lot of women really feel that loss of womanhood when they're not connected to their sexuality, right? And so finding that, again, really helps to change and transform lives. I see it all the time, right? Just tapping into sexuality makes somebody decide to leave a marriage or to change their job, right? There is a domino effect when we actually tap into our sexual center.
And what I'd like to clarify too there, which I love, is that we're talking about your sexuality, not your sexiness. So this is not about being the sexy babe. This is not about being so sexy. This is about your sexuality with or without men, right?
Yes.
And
totally.
that's fantastic. So now you work with couples one-on-one, and you do group workshops. Could you tell us a little bit about the work you offer?
Yeah, I basically want to help couples and women not make the mistakes that I made in my relationship. And so one of my favorite things to do, one of the most important things that I do, is to work with couples who are in sexless relationships and sexless marriages. And I actually have a 6-month program that I just launched about a month ago, which is called From Sexless to Sexy, 6 months to Bedroom Bliss. And it really is a coaching and counseling program to help people work through the blocks that prevent them from connecting with each other sexually. Sometimes it's shame. A lot of it is shame. A lot of it is emotional baggage that we've brought into the relationship, or that's arisen because of resentments that, these are the things that stop us from connecting. And then we work on well, how do we ask for what we want? What is it that we want? How do we connect into our deepest desires? How do we communicate that with our partner? How do we touch each other in a way that really makes us feel good? And I do that, with couples, and I do that with women as well. When I work with women individually, I also have an online program for women, which is called the Empowered Women's Guide to Orgasmic Bliss, which is a really yummy, beautiful program. We meet on Zoom like this once a week for, I think it's 9 weeks. And we really explore our sexuality and our desires. And it's just so beautiful to create a safe place. And that's what's important for me, to create a safe place where there's no judgment whatsoever, on to be able to explore and talk about your sexuality, whether it's with women or with a partner, with couples.
Wow, fantastic. Now, for those of you watching, if you want to go check out Xanet's programs, we've got a link for you. Just go to yourbrilliance.org/Xanet. That's yourbrilliance.org/XANET. Thank you for being on the show. And we're coming to an end. I wanted to know if there was any last message you would like to leave our viewers with.
Yes, I think the message I want to leave your viewers with is do not settle, and do not assume that you are broken, because everybody, even those who have severe trauma, I work with that all the time, can learn how to connect and reconnect with their sexuality in a healthy and safe way.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you out there for watching. We hope to see you again soon. Until then, let your brilliance shine.